The ball was in 11 hours, and Rosalind Vane had not yet decided whether she was going to it as herself or as the woman she had been pretending to be for the past 4 months. She stood at the small window of the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Pruitt's room, technically, which was now hers because Mrs. Pruitt had retired to her sister's cottage in Bath, and the Duke of Ashmore had needed someone to fill the position quickly and had not looked too carefully at her references. Rosalind had made sure of that. She had made sure of a great many things. Below, the groundsmen were already stringing lanterns between the oaks. The light was soft and gold even in the gray of the morning, and it occurred to her that her father had stood in this garden once and called it the finest in 3 counties. That had been before the solicitor's letter, before she had understood what losing him would actually mean. She turned from the window and went back to her list. There were 47 things to coordinate before 8 o'clock this evening, and 31 of them fell to her. The florist would arrive at 10. The extra Linsen has had to be moved from the east wing before noon because the musicians needed the space. Cook, Mrs. Beale, a formidable woman who had taken an initial dislike to Rosalind and then slowly and reluctantly reversed her opinion, had already sent word that she required 3 more pounds of butter than had been ordered and someone needed to go to the village and sort it. Rosalind wrote butter at the top of her list and underlined it twice. This was what her life had become. Lists, quiet competence, a ring of keys at her hip that opened every door in Ashmore Hall except the one that had once opened to her. Her cousin Phineas had seen to that. She had not planned to stay this long. The original intention had been a week, long enough to understand what had happened to her father's estate, long enough to find the letter she suspected existed, long enough to know whether what Phineas had done was merely opportunistic or deliberately criminal. A week had become a fortnight had become 4 months, and somewhere in the middle of November, when the Duke of Ashmore had stopped her in the corridor to ask why the east drawing room smelled of damp, and she had told him it was because the window latch was warped, and had been warped for 3 seasons, and she could show him if he liked. Somewhere in that moment, the situation had become considerably more complicated. His name was William Hargrove, and he was the 5th Duke of Ashmore, and he was nothing like what she had expected. She had expected old money and old arrogance. She had expected a man who walked through his own house the way men of his position often did, as though the walls themselves were there to serve him. She had found, instead, a man who learned the names of the groundsman's children, who read until 2 in the morning, and left his candles burning, and apologized to her, personally, when it created more work for the household, who had stood beside her at the warped window and listened, actually listened, when she explained the problem, and then said, quietly, that he did not know why no one had told him sooner, and she had almost said, because no one tells you things here. Your Grace, they manage them and hope you don't notice. But she had stopped herself. She had stopped herself a great many times. The keys at her hip were a responsibility, not a weapon. That was what she told herself. She was here for the letter, for the proof, for the thing Phineas had hidden somewhere in this house, because he had not dared take it away. She was not here for anything else. She looked at the list. Butter stared back at her. She put on her coat and went to the village. The morning passed in the particular controlled chaos that preceded any significant event at a house this size. Rosalind had learned, in 4 months, that Ashmore Hall ran on invisible machinery. A dozen small decisions made before breakfast that determined whether the afternoon would proceed smoothly or collapse into something she would spend the evening untangling. She moved through it with the efficiency she had built from necessity, because the alternative was to stop and feel what she was actually feeling. And she could not afford that. She was counting napkins in the dining room when Phineas arrived. She heard the carriage first, then his voice in the entrance hall, that particular voice, the one he had always used when he wanted people to believe he was at ease. She had known him her whole life. She knew what ease sounded like in him, and this was not it. This was performance. She set down the napkins and waited. He did not come to find her. Of course he did not. He did not know she was here. That was rather the point. She had seen him twice since she had taken the position, both times at enough distance that he had not recognized her. He had spent considerably less time at Ashmore in the past year than he had before her father's death, and she had concluded that this was because whatever he had hidden here, he trusted it to stay hidden. The house was not his. He could not simply walk in and retrieve it whenever he chose. He needed an occasion. A ball was an occasion. She went back to her napkins and counted more carefully. By 4 o'clock, the house had been transformed. This was always the part that caught Rosalind off guard, not the work of it, which she could manage, but the result. Ashmore Hall in ordinary daylight was large and rather austere, the kind of house that made you feel the weight of the generations that had lived in it. Ashmore Hall in the hour before a ball was something else entirely. The candles multiplied the rooms. The flowers softened the stone. The musicians were still tuning in the east wing, and the sound drifted through the corridors in fragments, half a melody, and then silence, and then 3 bars of something that resolved into nothing. She was checking the placement of the centerpieces when the Duke found her. Miss Vane. She turned. He was in evening dress already, which meant he had come downstairs early, which he sometimes did when there was something on his mind. She had learned to read the small signals of his movements the way she had once learned the layout of a room in the dark, out of necessity and then out of something closer to habit. Your Grace, she moved a candlestick 2 inches to the left. Is something wrong with your coat? My coat is fine. A pause. Is something wrong with the centerpiece? The roses on the left are leaning. They'll correct themselves in an hour, but Mrs. Beale will notice before they do, and it will trouble her. He looked at the roses, then at her. You've been here since before 6 this morning. The florist arrived early. That wasn't what I said. She met his eyes briefly and then looked back at the table. This was the complication she had not planned for. Not his attention. She had navigated that well enough, or she believed she had, but the quality of it. William Hargrove paid attention the way very few people did, as though he had decided at some point that things were worth the trouble of actually noticing. It made her careful, more careful than she liked. Everything is prepared, she said. The carriages will begin arriving at 7:30. Cook has the supper well in hand. I'll be on the east corridor if anything requires attention during the evening. I wanted to ask you something. The tone of it stopped her. There will be a man here tonight, he said. Phineas Vane. He'll arrive with the Caldecott party. I want to know. He stopped. Started again differently. Has anyone on the staff mentioned him to you? Said anything unusual about the time he spent here before I took the estate? The candlestick was perfectly placed. She had nowhere to look except at him. No, she said. Not that I recall. It was the first direct lie she had told him, and it sat in her chest like a stone. She found the letter at 8:15. She had not been looking for it. She had been looking for a missing silver ladle that Cook needed with some urgency, which had led her to the small storage room off the east passage that was used for overflow from the butler's pantry, which had led her to lift a wrong-sized box from a high shelf, which had led to a cascade of smaller boxes, which had led to a moment of undignified scrambling on the floor, and then to sitting very still on the floor looking at an envelope that had fallen from inside the lining of a leather portfolio she had never seen before. The handwriting on the outside was her father's. Her hands were entirely steady when she picked it up. She found this remarkable afterward. At the time, she did not think about her hands at all. The letter was dated 3 weeks before his death. It was addressed to his solicitor, not to Phineas, not to anyone in the family, but to Mr. Aldous Fenn of Gray's Inn, who had retired the year after her father died and whose replacement had reviewed the estate documents and found them entirely in order. Of course he had found them in order. Phineas had made sure of that. He had made sure the letter never reached Mr. Fenn, and he had hidden it here because this house had been in Hargrove hands for a century and a half, and no one would think to look for a Vane family document in a storage room off the east passage of Ashmore Hall. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it inside her dress. Then she sat on the floor for another moment because her legs had decided, independently, that they were not yet prepared to stand. Downstairs, the music had started properly now. She could hear it even here, a waltz, stately and inevitable, the kind of music that assumed the world was ordered and gracious, and that everyone present had a place in it. She had a place in it. She had simply been removed from it. She stood up, straightened her dress, and went to find the silver ladle. The ballroom at Ashmore Hall held approximately 200 people, comfortably, and considerably more than that when the occasion demanded. By 9 o'clock it held something closer to the latter, and Rosalind moved along the edges of it with the particular invisibility that came from being neither servant enough to be ignored, nor guest enough to be acknowledged. She was watching for Phineas. She found him instead talking to the Duke. This had not been in any version of the evening she had constructed. Phineas did not seek out the Duke. The Duke did not seek out Phineas. They were acquainted in the distant, obligatory way that men of adjacent social strata sometimes were. Not friends, not enemies, simply adjacent. But they were standing together near the east doorway with the specific posture of men in a conversation that had moved past pleasantries. And Phineas was smiling, which meant he was worried. She could not hear them. She moved closer, staying in the shadow of the far pillar, and she could see now that the Duke's expression was not what she would call social. It was the look he got when he was actually paying attention to something. The look she had seen at the window when she explained the latch, focused and careful and slightly too still. Phineas put his hand briefly on the Duke's arm. A gesture of camaraderie, or the performance of one. The Duke looked at the hand. Phineas removed it. Something had already happened then, or was already happening. Some conversation she had arrived too late for, some ground that had shifted before she entered the room. She was recalculating when a voice beside her said, "Miss Vane, I thought you were stationed on the east corridor." She turned. It was Mrs. Beale's assistant, young Thomas, not the Thomas from the list of names she had been given, but a different one, new to the position, looking at her with the slightly flustered expression he adopted whenever he was uncertain whether something was his problem or someone else's. "I am," she said. "I was checking the supper room. Mr. Vane was asking for you." She went very still. "Which Mr. Vane?" "The gentleman with the Caldecott party. He said he knew you." Of course he did. Of course he had seen her, recognized her despite the 4 months and the ring of keys and the careful nothing she had made of herself. She had known on some level that this was a possibility. She had told herself she was prepared for it. She found she was not prepared for it. "Thank you," she said to the assistant. "Tell him I'll be with him shortly." She turned back to the room. Phineas was still with the Duke. As she watched, the Duke said something, low, even, the tone she had heard him use once with a creditor who had been impolite, and Phineas's smile shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. She walked across the ballroom. She was aware of it happening in a way she was not usually aware of moving through a room. The specific quality of the space she was crossing, the light and the music and the 200 people arranged around the edges of it, and herself in the center of all of it, walking toward the man who had taken everything her father had left her, and the man who, in 4 months of corridor conversations and warped window latches and careful attention, had become the thing that complicated all of it. She stopped beside them. "Your Grace," she said. And then, because there was no other way to do it, "Cousin." Phineas looked at her. The smile dropped entirely. "Rosalind, Miss Vane," the Duke said, and there was something in his voice she could not immediately name. "You know Mr. Vane. He is my father's nephew," she said. "We grew up together." She kept her eyes on Phineas. "He attended my father's funeral. He handled the estate documents. He is the reason I am here." The last sentence was not one she had planned to say in a ballroom, with 200 people within earshot and her heart somewhere in the region of her collarbone. But she had said it, and Phineas's expression told her that he understood exactly what it meant. "Rosalind." His voice was low and managed. "This isn't the place. I found the letter," she said. "Quieter, just the 3 of them. The one you took from Mr. Fenn's correspondence before it reached him. The one in which my father asked to alter the terms of the trust." Phineas said nothing. He had always been good at saying nothing. It was one of the reasons he had been so difficult to prove. "I would like," she said, "for you to tell His Grace what was in it, since you read it before you hid it." She watched him decide. She had spent 4 months imagining this moment in various forms, and in most of them it had felt like a confrontation, 2 people opposed, a line drawn, a winner established. It did not feel like that. It felt like standing very quietly in a room while something that had been held taut for a long time simply released. Phineas looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at him with that expression, that careful, entirely unhurried expression, and Phineas looked away first. "I'll want to speak with my solicitor," Phineas said. "I expect you will," the Duke said. He found her at 11:30 on the terrace. She had not run away exactly. She had removed herself from the ballroom because the alternative was standing in it while the evening continued around her, and she was not sure she could manage that with any dignity. She had stood at the stone railing for a long time watching the lanterns in the oaks and not thinking about anything in particular, which was either peace or exhaustion, and she could not tell the difference. "You should have told me." He was not accusing her of anything. His voice had the flat directness it got when he was saying something he had thought through. "I know. When you arrived, when you took the position, you should have told me. I didn't know if I could trust you." She turned to look at him. "I didn't know you. I knew you owned a house that had something I needed inside it, and I knew that men of your position had considerable latitude in deciding what constituted trespass and what didn't. I needed access to the house. I took the most direct route available to me." He was quiet for a moment. Somewhere inside, a violin resolved into a long, satisfied note. "You're very good at the work," he said, "for someone who was not trained for it. My mother ran a household of 30. I watched her for 20 years. She paused. "I also had a great deal of time these past 4 months to read Mrs. Beale's predecessor's notes. She was extraordinarily thorough." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Closer to the thing that happened before a smile when the decision was still being made. "The letter," he said. "It establishes the trust was altered. It establishes that my father intended to alter it, and communicated that intention to his solicitor in writing. Phineas ensured the solicitor never received the communication. Whether that constitutes criminal fraud rather than simply civil fraud is a question for a barrister, but either way it is sufficient to reopen the estate proceedings." She heard herself say it all very calmly and thought distantly that she had rehearsed this particular speech approximately 11 times, and it was working better than expected. "I don't expect to recover everything, but I expect to recover enough. And after that," she looked at him. "After the proceedings," he said, "after the estate is settled, what do you intend?" It was not a question she had thought about. She had thought about the letter, about Phineas, about Mr. Fenn's successor, and the proceedings and the barrister, and the sum she might reasonably expect to recover. She had not thought about what came after, because after had seemed like a country too far away to plan a route to. "I don't know," she said honestly. The lanterns moved in a slight wind. One of them had gone out, near the far oak, and the gap it left was a small and specific darkness. "I've been trying," he said, "since approximately November, to determine whether the feeling I have when you explain things to me is professional respect or something that requires considerably more honesty than I've been applying to it." She did not move. "I've concluded," he said, "that it is the latter." The wind shifted again. Rosalind Vane, who had spent 4 months being very still and very careful and very certain of exactly what she was doing in this house and why, found that she had run out of stillness. "You knew who I was," she said, "before tonight. You already knew. I suspected, since January." He met her eyes. "Your father's portrait is in the East Gallery. I walk past it when I'm restless." "You look like him." She breathed in slowly. "And you said nothing. You said nothing. I thought, if there was a reason for the silence, it was yours to end." There was a long moment that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. She had expected, if this moment came, to feel exposed. She felt instead something closer to the sensation of setting down a very heavy bag after a very long walk, the mild shock of the weight being absent, and the slowly dawning awareness that her hands were free. "The East Gallery needs rehanging," she said. "The light comes wrong in the afternoon. Several of the portraits are fading." "I know," he said. "I was going to ask the housekeeper about it." She looked at him. He looked back. The remaining lanterns held their light in the dark garden, steady and specific, and the music from inside was something slow now, unhurried, the kind that assumed no particular urgency and no particular end. She stayed on the terrace.